Wharlest Jackson Sr.
He was a very fine, soft-spoken, determined, God-fearing man.
A family man.
Wife and 5 children he was raising and supporting.
Supporting with a job at Armstrong Tire and Rubber. In 1967, Wharlest Jackson was up for a promotion at the tire factory. An 18-cent raise for a position that would have put him in charge of white workers at that factory.
Jackson was on his way home from work, almost home when he put on his turn signal.
It was his first day on the job.
It made no sense.
Some say the Ku Klux Klan had infiltrated all aspects of the Natchez community, and those same folks say the Klan is responsible for...
Every crime tells a story, and behind every story is a name, a face, and a life interrupted. Today, we'll shine light on the unsolved case of Wharlest Jackson Sr. Located on the banks of Mississippi River, Natchez, Mississippi is one of the oldest cities in the American South. Founded by the French in 1716, the city is known for its antebellum architecture, cobblestone streets, and deep committed historic preservation. One of its most iconic features is the Natchez Trace Parkway, a scenic byway that follows ancient trails once traveled by the Native Americans, stretching from Natchez all the way to Nashville, Tennessee. Though renowned for its architectural beauty and economic legacy, Natchez is equally defined for its long history of racial division and social unrest. It is also the birthplace of one of Mississippi's most powerful yet overlooked civil rights movement in the 1960s. Wharlest Jackson was born December 7, 1929 in Millers Ferry, Florida, to Willie and Effie Jackson. He was one of 7 siblings. His mother, Effie, passed away in the year of 1934. Just a few years later, in 1940, Wharlest and his siblings were sent to live with their grandmother. He later served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. It was during this time he would meet his future wife, Exerlina, on a blind date. In February of 1954, shortly after his return from the service, the two were married and settled in Natchez, Mississippi, Exerlina's hometown. They had 5 children together, 4 daughters and 1 son. In 1955, Wharlest began working at Armstrong Tire and Rubber Company. Exerlina found work as a cook at the historic Stanton Hall. To provide for his growing family, Wharlest also took on additional side jobs. It was at Armstrong that he met and formed a close friendship with fellow co-worker and activist George Metcalf. More than a devoted husband and father, Wharlest Jackson was a committed civil rights activist, deeply rooted in the movement for justice and equality in the Deep South. As an active member of the NAACP, he assisted the organization in ways to help improve the community of Natchez. In 1963, the assassination of civil rights leader Medgar Evers sent shockwaves across Mississippi and galvanized many into action. Determined to continue his younger brother's legacy, Charles Evers revived the Natchez chapter of the NAACP. To lead the local fight for civil rights, he appointed key figures in the community: George Metcalf as president, Jesse Bernard Williams as secretary, and Wharlest Jackson as treasurer. In this leadership role, Wharlest helped organize voters' registration drives, led civil rights petitions, and community meetings aimed at confronting systemic inequality. His wife, Exerlina, was equally committed. When Wharlest was working, she would step in, attending NAACP meetings, assisting in organizing, and encouraging Black residents to register to vote. Though Wharlest was against it and feared for her safety, Excelina would also join local marches, determined to contribute to the movement. In mid-August 1965, under the direction of George Metcalf, the president of the organization, the Natchez NAACP chapter filed a formal petition against the Natchez-Adams County Public School Board, demanding the desegregation of local schools. Just 2 weeks later, on August 27, Metcalf was critically injured when a car bomb detonated beneath the hood of his vehicle as he turned on the ignition. The attack was intended to send a message. During his time of recovery, Wharlest and Excelina stepped in to care for George. No one was ever arrested or charged in this crime.
George Metcalf, president of the Natchez branch of NAACP.
After Metcalf was injured, he didn't have anybody. So Wharlest and Ursulina cared for him.
George Metcalf worked at the Armstrong Tire and Rubber Company along with my father. They wrote together to work every day.
He was like his provider.
The day after the attack on George Metcalf, a group of local activists led by James Big Jack Jackson, a barber and president of the Natchez chapter of the Deacons for Defense and Justice, traveled to Bogalusa, Louisiana to secure reinforcements. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, many of whom were actual church deacons, were an armed African-American self-defense organization formed to protect civil rights activists from racial violence in the Jim Crow South. In the wake of the attack, they began arming themselves for protection.
You began to see the deacons out in front protecting demonstrations, protecting Black leaders, protecting the community.
White people were concerned when they saw the Black people carrying guns. They knew about the so-called Deacons for Defense.
With the deacons, you had a rhetoric that was different from previous rhetoric, you would hear from Martin Luther King and others in the nonviolent aspect of the movement.
I believe, just like Martin Luther King, everybody else, I believe in nonviolence. On the other hand, I believe that our people should stop getting killed, man.
Shortly after, the NAACP initiated a citywide boycott against white-owned businesses in Natchez. With support from the Deacons for Defense, enforcement of the boycott was strict. Community leaders presented 12 formal demands to the city officials. Some of those demands were an end to police brutality, the public denouncement of the Ku Klux Klan, the desegregation of public facilities, and the hiring of Black workers in businesses. At first, the demands were flatly rejected. In response, the boycott intensified. Those who went against or broke the boycott faced social pressure and community discipline. The impact was swift. Several white-owned businesses in Natchez shut down due to loss of revenue. Just 3 months after the attack on George Metcalf, and under the weight of economic pressure, Natchez Mayor John Nosher capitulated. 23 white-owned businesses agreed to begin hiring Black employees and giving them fair opportunities to apply for higher positions in the company. The decision to yield to civil rights demand was met with both anger and disbelief by segregationists and white supremacists. But for Black residents of Natchez, it was a hard-fought victory, paid with courage, sacrifice, and resilience. In late 1966, a higher-paying position opened at Armstrong Tire and Rubber Company, a role that had always been reserved for white men. The company, much like Natchez, was still deeply segregated in practice, and many of the white employees were known members of the KKK and made no secret of their beliefs. The idea of a black man stepping into a traditionally white role was seen by some as a disgrace. However, in the wake of the Civil Rights Act, companies were under increased pressure to desegregate their hiring practices and open higher-paying positions for black workers to apply. Wharlest Jackson was one of the several men eligible for the position. Ex-Selena was adamantly against it. "I begged him not to take that job," she stated in a later interview. After what had happened to their close friend George Metcalf just months earlier, she feared history would repeat itself. But Wharlest, being the provider, saw the promotion as a way to better support his 5 children and wife, who was suffering from lupus complications. Despite her plea, he applied alongside 2 white co-workers.
My mom was real worried about my dad. She was almost, like in a nervous frenzy every time my dad would leave and go out to work.
Jackson had a whole lot of things going against him. He was involved in civil rights. He rode to work with George Metcalf, and he took a job that for the history of Armstrong Tire Company had only belonged to a white man.
Wharlest, being the most qualified and having seniority, was chosen for the job. Aware that taking the job made him a target, Wharlest said little about his concerns. On the evening of February 27, 1967, not long after his promotion, Wharlest Jackson left work after finishing an overtime shift at Armstrong Rubber and Tire Company in Natchez, Mississippi. He climbed into his green 1966 Chevrolet pickup and drove towards home. At approximately 8 p.m., as he used the turn signal to turn onto Minor Street, just a few blocks from his job and home, a bomb planted beneath his truck detonated. The force of the blast hurtled the truck's roof nearly 100 feet from the scene and ripped the truck apart. Metal and glass covered the street. The sound could be heard across the city. Residents rushed outside in panic. Wharlest Jr., just 8 years old at the time, was outside and heard the explosion.
I stood right here, working on my bicycle in front of my house. I was trying to get my banana seat right, and I had a nice big fat tire on the back of it. I used to see those guys riding those choppers, man. I wanted to make my bike like that too. I heard the explosion in my mind, like, what is that? I never heard anything like that before. I jumped on my bicycle. I shot right down there and shot straight to this here street here. You can look straight down the street to MLK. I'm noticing people outside of their houses, and I just rode up there and started looking at it. I saw a gentleman laying in the street. Not knowing who he was, and seeing the truck, knowing who truck that was, and not being able to connect the dots together. I saw a shoe that he was wearing, and I grabbed that shoe and came to the house. And later, I heard from my mother as I grew up, I had come back with his flesh in the shoe.
Ex-Selena recalled knowing immediately when she heard the sound, something had happened to her husband. The explosion caused serious damage to his lower torso. He passed away at the scene. Wharlest Jackson was 36 years old. The unaliving of Wharlest Jackson ignited outrage amongst Black Americans. and jolted many modern whites to finally acknowledge the violent racism entrenched in their communities, forcing many to confront the harsh reality. In the aftermath of the explosion that unalived Wharlest Jackson, the FBI launched an investigation. It was given the code name War Bomb. The evidence at the scene painted a disturbing picture. Based on the area of the extensive damage, investigators concluded that the bomb had been placed beneath the driver's seat, underneath the vehicle on the outside frame. The device was wired to the turn signal. When Wharlest used the turn signal to make the turn, it triggered the device, causing the explosion. The FBI could not identify what type of explosive material was used. Laboratory examiners combed through the wreckage and analyzed debris collected at the scene, but no fingerprints were recovered, and ultimately the physical evidence collected failed to produce any significant leads. Over the course of the investigations, the FBI stated that they interviewed hundreds of individuals, including Armstrong Rubber and Tire employees, local residents, law enforcement, family members, and known members of the KKK. The FBI would then obtain a tip regarding two men, Riley Glover, also known as Red, and Eldon Hester, also known as Junkman, as possible suspects. Unfortunately, there was no image of Eldon Hester online, only documentation. Both had worked with Wharlest at Armstrong Tire and Rubber, and both were known members of the Silver Dollar Group, a violent, secret offshoot of the KKK. The informant told investigators that Glover and Hester had obtained explosives prior to the bombing and were seen moving them shortly afterwards. But when questioned by the FBI, both men denied any involvement. Although the FBI considered seeking search warrants for their homes, they ultimately backed off. At the time, possession of explosives was not considered a federal crime, and the case lacked solid legal grounds needed for a search. Law enforcement would then state that the informant was unreliable due to what they described as poor memory and a history of drug use. Agents concluded he wouldn't hold up as a credible witness in court. Despite widespread belief that Wharlest had been targeted by accepting a job promotion traditionally held by white men, the FBI stated they couldn't officially confirm the motive or definitively identify who was responsible. In August 1968, citing insignificant, credible, or collaborated evidence, they would close the case. In 2007, as part of the Department of Justice Cold Case Initiative, the FBI reopened the Wharlest Jackson investigation. A year later, Congress passed the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act of 2008, providing additional support to re-examine racially motivated unaliving from the Civil Rights era. Agents once again went through original files, revisited leads, and sought out any surviving witnesses. Riley Glover passed away in 1984 at the age of 62. Eldon Hester passed away in 2004 at the age of 76. Other potential suspects and key witnesses were also deceased. The investigation failed to uncover any new or conclusive evidence. No charges were filed, no further suspects were identified. The case again went cold. On May 5, 2015, after nearly 5 decades, the FBI officially closed the case, stating that despite exhaustive efforts, they were unable to determine who was responsible for the unaliving of Wharlest Jackson. With courage, sacrifice, determination, and unity, the civil rights movement in Natchez became one of the most impactful and successful movements in Mississippi's history. A major part of that movement was Wharlest Jackson Sr., a devoted husband, father, and activist who took a bold step forward by accepting a promotion many believe was too good for a black man in 1967. In doing so, he pushed open a door to equality that was never meant to be unlocked. His unaliving was a brutal reminder of the cost of progress, yet his life stands as a testimony to the unshakable spirit of a man who believed in dignity, equality, and opportunity without fear. Wharlest Jackson Sr. is honored amongst the 40 martyrs listed on the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. The Jacksons' home in Natchez, Mississippi, located in one of the city's oldest African American neighborhoods, was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2017. In 2022, PBS Frontline aired American Reckoning, bringing national attention to this painful chapter in American history, a documentary I highly recommend. And on November 9, 2024, another historical marker was unveiled honoring the Deacons for Defense and Justice, who also played a major part in the success of the Civil Rights Movement. Excelina Jackson passed away in 2009 at the age of 72, never receiving justice for the unaliving of her husband. George Metcalf passed away in 1989 at the age of 77. Wharlest Jackson Jr. would quote, "These people got by us, but they won't get by God," and I totally agree. May Wharlest Jackson Sr. and Excelina Jackson rest in peace. No story is forgotten. No voice should go unheard. Sending my deepest condolences and prayers to the family and friends. Until the next time, thank you for watching Shades of Crime. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember to pray. God's listening.